So before you begin your final project with watercolors, we have to practice the type of techniques that you can use on your project. So the first thing that you're going to get is you're going to get this little booklet that I've made for you. You're going to get a worksheet that shows each technique that should be on every page. On the bottom of each page, I want you to put in pencil that technique that you're working on. For the purpose of the cover, I just want you to write your name with watercolors on top of it. The first technique that you're going to practice with is wet on dry. This just means you have a dry surface that you're working with and you're putting wet paint on to the surface. So if you dip your brush in water and grab any pigment of your choice, just paint over this page however you would like with that color. Then as we work with wet on wet, you can practice by already getting the surface wet with water by putting it over the paper, and then you can go and get your first color, whichever color that you want, and kind of just start playing around with adding the color into water. And then I want you to once again go back in and grab a different color, probably an analogous color because those next to each other on the color wheel look nice together. And then what I want you to see is the colors kind of like blending together. It looks very dreamlike and beautiful. So artists will typically use wet on wet watercolor techniques when they begin a watercolor painting, just because it begins to lay down the surface of the color for them to be able to go back in later with a dry brush or more pigment to layer on top slowly to get nice values and colors. For the third and fourth pages of your booklet, you're going to be working with two different techniques that are totally opposite from each other. So on the third page, you're going to lay down a bunch of water and then just start adding paint to that water, and then watch how it spreads and fills up that area. Then you're going to work with a dry brush technique. A dry brush technique means that you're actually going to be adding basically no water to your watercolor so you can get as much pigment as you can. So what I'm doing here is I'm pulling out as much pigment from that watercolor palette with the water I already have in my brush. Then I can just use directly from that, and I'm going to get the most vibrant colors by doing it this way. Next, you're going to be working with two different types of edges in watercolor painting, a hard edge and a soft edge. A hard edge in a painting means that you can actually see the outline. Like there's more pigment, it's darker, and we can actually see around it. Once you work on a soft edge, it's going to be more transparent and you're going to have a little bit more water in it. A soft edge to me, when I think about it, is basically a shape that doesn't have any visible outline. So these two techniques that I'm going to show you are really good if you need to keep a white value on your painting. Blotting is good because you can take a paper towel while your paint is wet and actually lift the color off of your paper to make the color a little bit lighter. Now what I'm doing here is adding more water because my paper dried in an area, and I'm blending my pigment with the water, and I can lift it up again with the paper towel if it dries. So if I need to go back and add a white value, that's what I'm going to do. When you're working with a resist, if you know one area is going to stay white and you need it to stay white, you can use a wax resist like a candle, oil pastel, or crown. You probably did this in elementary school. And you can go over with your paint. The darker the paint, the better, so you can see it and it looks just like that. Beautiful. So you've been working with value all year long with different mediums. Now you're going to try it with watercolors. The first thing that you're going to have to do is draw 6 squares across 2 pages of your booklet. Now you can use any color for your value scale. I just like using black because it's easier to see that transition of dark to light. So what I'm doing in the first square is I'm using a dry brush technique where I'm taking as much pigment as I can from the pan and putting it down in the first square. Then in the second square, I'm taking paint from the pan and adding water to it on my palette, then adding it back to my paper, and then you'll see it get a little bit lighter. So now with that paint that I've dragged out of my watercolor pan to my palette, I'm adding water to the pigment I already have out, and I'm putting it into the third square. Now for the rest of it, I'm just going to add my brush back into the water over and over again, and you're going to see it start getting lighter, because as I put my brush in the water, it's getting rid of that pigment on my brush. So now you're going to create a graded wash. This is just like the value scale, except now there are no boxes. You have to rely solely on the technique of how you use the brush. So all I did was take my brush, put it in water, then put it into the pigment that I wanted, and then I'm going slowly from left to right down to the edge of the paper. I'm putting my brush in water over and over again just to get rid of some of that pigment, and you'll see that it's getting lighter as I go towards the bottom. Now I'm going back in and just making it a little bit darker, but I'm still going slowly left to right and getting that nice gradient. The next step that you're going to do is just blend two colors together. It would work better if you use two primary colors just to see what they look like. A lot of artists do like to blend their colors more rather than just use a secondary color, for example, straight from the watercolor pan. So I'm using blue and yellow. I'm trying to make a green in the center. So on this page, you're actually going to work back with the sphere again. So draw a circle, and we're going to work with value at this point to create a three-dimensional sphere. Before you start painting, I want you to draw a fake sun, it could be a stick sun, on the left side of your sphere. Remember, the sun rays are hitting the left side of the sphere, so that'll be lighter, and on the opposite, it'll be darker. So I'm starting with a dry brush technique to get the darkest shadow that I can on one side. Then I'm going to add my brush in the water and create a graded wash from the pigment that's already on my paper and drag it slowly towards my light. At this point you should see it get a little bit lighter, but I'm going to blot the left side of my sphere that's closest to the sun just to get that really nice highlight. I don't really like the edge of how my sphere looks, and I know it needs more work, so I'm going to go back in and add some darker pigment to the right side, opposite of my light, just to give it a little bit more value. Once I feel I have enough darker values, I'm just going to take my brush and kind of clean up, just with water, my blending, so that it looks more clean from light to dark rather than hard edges that I don't really want to work with, because I mean, you don't have outlines on objects in the real life. Everything is created with value to make it look three-dimensional. Now the last part, you're just going to play with your line work with your brush. You can use any color, you can use dry brush techniques, you can use more water on your brush if you like that look as well. But I want you to practice with the tip of the brush just to see what kind of lines you can get. And then I want you to practice with the side of your brush and see what kind of lines you can get as well. With the space that you have left, I want you to experiment with different types of line. I used wavy lines, I used spirals. It doesn't matter what you choose, just kind of fill up the space just to see how your brush handles. Then I want you to go over certain areas with color just to see how that looks. Once you're finished with this booklet, you can turn it in to me and I'll give you your next assignment.